So we, yeah.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, me muted.
We're going to go ahead and get started since we are just a couple minutes past 7. I'm going to let Bronwyn is here from Crohn's and Colitis. She's going to give just a few updates, and then Dr. McCutchen will introduce our guest speaker.
Thank you, Ashley. I appreciate that. Hello, everyone. Yes, my name is Bronwyn Kears. I am one of the education and engagement managers at the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation. I currently am managing the Southeast region, which includes Atlanta. I'm very excited to join this program. I've heard it's super successful. I've heard great things about it. And with that success, we have actually decided to move it from the support group category to a support and education category. We're now under the umbrella of the MyIBD learning platform, which will provide you guys with options to look up these programs. They'll be available on the MyIBD learning website, the same website on the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation that you'll see under the patients and caregivers tab. And one of the best things about this is that we are going to, moving forward, be recording these sessions so that you can hear the experts, go back and review and listen again to the information that was shared. If you miss an evening, we'll be able to share that recording information with you so that you have access to those as well. And those will all be made available, I believe, one through Ashley's communication, as well as on the website where you can explore past programs. So we're very excited for that. With that being said, we are going to record this evening session. So if you wanted to share any questions, you're welcome to provide them into the chat box. I believe you guys have in the past come up and spoken as well. So keep that in mind that as we're recording, if you don't want to share anything personal, you're welcome to put it into the chat, and then we can, of course, provide that to you guys at your discretion. But I would love to go ahead and pass it to Dr. McCutchen. Thank you all for having me this evening too. I'm really looking forward to being here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bronwyn. And I just wanted to take a moment to thank everyone that's kind of behind the scenes. Allison, Mo, Ashley, Pollard, you've been wonderful. And for those of you that don't know me, I am a partner and physician leader at Atlanta Gastroenterology with a special interest in inflammatory bowel disease. And we established this Northeast Georgia support group pre-COVID in like 2018, 2019. And I really found it fun to just have guest speakers that could answer questions that were posed to me in the office and really offer a broader, more comprehensive sort of viewpoint for our patients that are living every day with inflammatory bowel disease. So with that being said, thank you so much, Kristina Campbell, for joining us tonight. I actually found Kristina on Twitter. And she is an expert in the microbiome, and the microbiome is just a fascinating environment in and of itself. And we want to learn more about it because we know that our therapies are really focused now, some of them on the microbiome, and perhaps we can personalize medicine by just focusing on the gut bacteria that are present. And we've all heard of prebiotics, probiotics, postbiotics. And so I think this is a great opportunity for us to learn from Kristina Campbell in her work, as well as what anyone else has to contribute on this. So without further ado, I wanted to just turn it over to you, Kristina Campbell, to introduce yourself and tell us what you do, and just touch on your exciting books as well that you've written.
Thank you so much, Dr. McCutchen. Really a pleasure to be here and chat and learn from all of you as well. Yeah, so my name is Kristina Campbell. I am a writer, and I've been covering this area kind of as a reporter, scientific reporter, for about 8 years now. And back then, 8 years ago, it was just really emerging, and it was this kind of weird area of science that some people were doing and scientists were getting into. But now I think the technologies have gotten cheaper, a lot more labs are using them, and they're incorporating them into all kinds of studies. And actually, one of the first sort of disease indications that was of interest to microbiome researchers was inflammatory bowel disease. So we'll get more into that, but I'll just tell you kind of the overview of what I do. So kind of every day I am in contact with microbiome researchers, and I'm writing articles, infographics, website copy, and blogs, and I write just about everything. And I have 2 books. One is a cookbook, actually, which describes, has 2 introductory chapters describing the microbiome. And then it's basically high fiber recipes for supporting your microbiome. And that is in people without IBD. So not necessarily for people with IBD, that cookbook. And then the second one is, I was very lucky to collaborate with Ed Ishiguro, a microbiologist, and Natasha Haskey, a dietitian, registered dietitian up in Canada here, and write this textbook kind of giving the overview on particularly diet and gut microbes and health, and how all those kind of triangulate and work together to support our health. And actually the textbook, we're currently working on a 2nd edition. So I think that should come out in about a year and a half. The timeline is pretty long, but yeah, so it's my pleasure to be here and just share, you know, what I've been learning in talking to the scientists and keeping my head in the literature every day, and also learn from you about your experiences and what questions you have. So I guess I wanted to just start off asking everyone tuning in that if you want to go down to your reaction button at the bottom, can you just give a thumbs up if you have ever you know, done anything to try to improve your microbiome? So it could have been like a test or a product or something in your diet. Okay. So it looks like, yeah, several of you, quite a few. Definitely I have. I started, again, like my interest initially in this was that I had gut problems. It wasn't to the level of an IBD diagnosis, but kind of really debilitating gut symptoms. And that's what got me curious in this area of science in the first place. So yeah, it's been a really great learning journey. And I think, yeah, we're entering this time where I think solutions are close, really good solutions for tweaking the microbiome for better health. So yeah, I mean, Dr. McCutchen, do you want to jump right into some questions, or do you want a little overview before we start?
Yeah, so Christina, I think it would be great for those that may not be as familiar with the microbiome to just sort of first fundamentally describe what the microbiome is and maybe the role that it plays on a day-to-day basis in our ecosystem, if you will.
Great. Yes. Okay. So the microbiome is a collection of microorganisms. So these are living things. And I think a lot of us think it's all bacteria, because bacteria are the members of the microbiome that are talked about the most. But in fact, there's an array of different types of microorganisms, and it includes fungi as well, viruses, and technically those aren't living, but they sort of, they're sort of symbiotic sometimes with the living organisms, or they shape the living organisms. So they're considered part of that community. And so all these microorganisms of different types and different abilities living together in an ecosystem. And we have different microbiomes all over our bodies. The Human Microbiome Project in the US did kind of an initial survey of where you have microbiomes. And so they're all over your skin on your outer body, and then all in different places inside your body. So especially the digestive tract. So quite a few of them live in your mouth. I guess that's no surprise, because we all brush our teeth to get rid of certain ones. And then all the way down, you know, your esophagus. Some do live in your stomach. I think that's a myth that the stomach is sterile, but it's actually not. It's just that some acid tolerant microbes live there. And then further down in the small intestine, the large intestine, especially the large intestine, just chock full of these microbes, the most concentrated site in the body. And what they do for us, they do a lot. So the main thing that I think scientists have found is that they're in constant dialogue with the immune system. And particularly in the small intestine, there's a region there called the gut-associated lymphoid tissue, which is like this area that there's a lot of immune cells, and things that enter the body get presented to that area, and then the immune system decides whether to attack or, back off. So that's kind of that inflammation piece, like whether there's an inflammatory response in your body to a certain thing, whether it's a food or like a substance, toxic substance, or a pathogen or anything like that. So also microbes, the other main thing that they do is they help regulate your metabolism. And so basically what you get out of what you eat. And so they're involved in different aspects of weight control and like type 2 diabetes and all of these metabolic type conditions. There's involvement of the gut microbes there. So, and again, mechanisms of all this are still kind of being sorted out, but we definitely know they're involved in those two things in the body. And what I want to emphasize above all in this conversation is that in the gut, and of course we talk lots about the gut microbiome particularly, in the gut, I think we need to think of the microbes as an ecosystem. And just think about that, like, what we know about ecosystems in nature, let's say, it's hard to label things as very good or very bad in a natural ecosystem. And I guess just one example, I was driving with my family. We took a road trip this summer, and we were driving from the West Coast, where I live in British Columbia, to Manitoba. So that's north of North Dakota. And it was really interesting to see the landscape change and the ecosystem change. And at one point we were driving in the prairies, and we were seeing so many dragonflies. Like, they were just constantly pinging off the windshield, and like the whole sky was just filled with them. You could just see nothing but dragonflies. And then I started thinking about that ecosystem. I'm like, well, in that ecosystem, there are actually lots of mosquitoes. So probably it's good to have that many dragonflies eating all the mosquitoes. But back in BC, where we came from, that would be really weird. That would be like a plague to see that many dragonflies around. So it's like, there's nothing wrong with the dragonflies. It just depends where they are, and as to like how useful they are to the ecosystem. So I think if we think of bacteria that way, I think it'll be productive. So instead of labeling different bacteria as good and bad, like thinking about it as it's in a context, it's maybe it trends toward being a good bacteria, that it dampens inflammation, but it really does depend where and when you see it.
Whoops, I was muted. That's a nice explanation of sort of understanding that not all bacteria are friends and not all of them are foe, because, as people, we tend to want to categorize things as kind of good or bad. I mean, that's what we do. We kind of split things. So I'm going to dive right into some questions. And if you have any questions, anybody that's on tonight's event, please put them in the chat box. But I'll go ahead and start by asking the question, because this is an IBD support group, an educational series. Is there evidence of decreased biodiversity in inflammatory bowel disease? So one of the things that I've come across in my reading is that perhaps inflammatory bowel disease patients have a different environment, and that there has been studies showing that there's less mucus, which is protective, and there's decreased biodiversity. And so what that means is that we all have trillions of bacteria and fungi, as you said, and viruses in our gut. And these are pretty much living there with us every day. And sometimes we get disturbances in that balance, and that disturbance may result for example, in disease, and may be altered in certain states. So is there actually evidence of decreased biodiversity, meaning there's not as much variation in species in inflammatory bowel disease?
Definitely. Yeah, that is one of the consistent findings across many, many studies, is that if you compare people without IBD to people with IBD, often people with IBD have reduced, diversity. So they have more of certain types of bacteria and not as much variety in there. So, and diversity in general, whether in health or any other condition, it is seen as really good. And again, you can think of a real life nature ecosystem. It's usually good to have a diverse ecosystem with lots of different types of, frogs and mice and insects all living together, kind of keeping each other in check. So, but it isn't to say that fixing that diversity problem would cure the, condition, but it is usually seen as beneficial and better for the immune system to try to increase the diversity.
And that leads, Christina, to my next question, which is there a way that we can then increase gut diversity? For example, a lot of our patients come and they're on probiotics. And I think the idea is that we're balancing something out with probiotics. Specifically, what's been touted is that we're giving our bodies back the good bacteria that we need to outweigh the bad bacteria or the harmful bacteria that may be present. So is there truly a way to increase gut diversity? That's my first question. And the second question then leads into the probiotic theory.
Yeah, so I think there can be ways definitely to increase diversity, but surprisingly, it may not have to do with probiotics as much. So the thing is with probiotics that they've been studied for many years. Even before the microbiome was studied, people studied probiotics and like what effects do they have on health. And most of the time, people have found they actually don't stay in the gut. They kind of pass through, have some effects on health. Well, hopefully they have effects on health. Not all of them do, but if it's kind of a good quality, reliable probiotic, they pass right through, they get excreted, but on the way, they do some good. So in a way, you're not necessarily increasing the diversity because they go right through, and people have likened it to, what if you were to drop some giraffes in the middle of the Canadian mountains? Like, what is it going to do? Is it going to change the ecosystem? Probably not. So basically probiotics, they can affect health, but maybe not increase the diversity. So what can increase the diversity seems to be fiber, because many gut microbes that are anti-inflammatory love to chow on fiber. And so the more varied sources of fiber you can eat, the better diversity you will see in your gut. And I know there's a bit of a complication here because, I have lots of relatives with inflammatory bowel disease and some friends, and many of them say at least at a certain point that they have trouble digesting fiber, like it causes discomfort. So I think the question is, how can each individual get more varied sources of fiber in their diets, insoluble fibers, but also, soluble, but also insoluble if possible, because the insoluble tend to be like less tolerated sometimes. So have you found that in your practice, Dr. McCutchen?
Yeah, so those are great points. So the fiber, or if we can call them prebiotics, because the prebiotics are kind of fibers, those may not be as well tolerated in terms of it depends on the source. So in raw sort of bulky vegetables in our patients that do have a lot of small intestinal inflammation, it may be that that's not really kind of conducive to their particular disease state at the time. So, but we do know that that fiber is very important to your overall gut health in terms of, kind of keeping your gut integrity intact and so forth. And so we do try to find alternative ways to make sure that they are actually getting enough dietary fiber.
Mhm. And I think now I've been seeing a little more research on resistant starch, and that's a kind of fiber that is sort of a gentle fiber, but it starts to break down in the colons, not further up in the digestive tract. And I think some people can tolerate it more than others. There's things like potato starch that are resistant starch, or different supplements that you can find. But definitely just as many sources as possible. The study that really showed that was the American Gut Project. And they had people from all over America send in samples of their gut microbes. They gave them dietary questionnaires. And the people who ate 30 or more different plant foods per week were the ones with the most diversity in their guts. So yeah, if you can hit 30, I think that's a good target number. It seems like a lot, but it does add up if you have like a breakfast cereal with 5 or 6 grains, or, yeah, I think there's a lot of ways you can boost that.
So when you say 30, Christina, are you referring to 30 types or 30 different fiber sources per day?
Just for the week. Yeah.
For the week. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And so that leads into my next question, which are prebiotics. So there's lots of prebiotics, and we've heard of, kombucha, different things like that. What are prebiotics that are maybe prepackaged helpful, or is it better based on studies to have the fibers in their most natural form? Can you give us any insight on that?
Yeah, so exactly. Prebiotics are often special types of fibers that the way that they work is by boosting different gut microbes and then affecting health, benefiting health. So, and actually, just as a quick aside, not all prebiotics have to be fiber by the definition, but currently the ones that have been studied that are under the label prebiotic, they are fibers. And so, yeah, these are things like FOS and GOS, and inulin. Inulin is really common to find in different packaged products like granola bars. You can check the labels on that. Yeah, so there's the fibers that are in the special category of prebiotic. They can be found either in supplement form or in packaged foods, or even in just whole foods. So like bananas, garlic, onion, they all have prebiotics. Jerusalem artichoke is like one of the highest sources of prebiotics naturally. So as for whether it's good to eat the whole food versus the supplement, I mean, I think it does depend. I think I always kind of am biased toward whole foods, but then again, if you take the supplements, you might just be able to get the right amount that you want, that you couldn't tolerate that much in a whole food. So the supplements give you a lot of control over how much you're getting. So you can, even if you are at a birthday party that day and have a bunch of cake and you're not hungry to come home and have steamed broccoli, well, you can take your supplement and you're still having your, allocation of fiber for the day. So I kind of go back and forth between the supplements. I have some of the prebiotic supplements in my cupboard, but I don't use them every day. It's kind of some days when I feel like I'm not meeting my dietary goals, I'll pull out the supplement.
Perfect. And there's someone in our group here that says high fiber foods give me diarrhea. So is it wrong to stay on low fiber foods? And if yes, how do you balance it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough question because like in the literature, I see this disconnect sometimes between when they do studies, they find that even though someone may have symptoms like that they don't like, obviously like diarrhea, that if they eat fiber, like their disease course is better. And some of those clinical markers that you would test, like, fecal calprotectin or something like that would be better, when they eat fiber, although they have symptoms. So it's hard to tell, like you might be getting benefit from the fiber, even if you don't, or if you are having the symptoms. So, but I understand, like you don't obviously want the symptoms. So in that case, like it might be good to try to get like a dietitian consultation or something and just be like troubleshoot with them. Like, how can I get a little more fiber in a way that I can tolerate? And often they'll say, work up, because then basically your gut microbes adapt. And that's the thing that, in fact, just like a recent study, and I did a Q&A on Twitter about this, your gut microbes have a memory, and it's so cool. Like this ecology, it remembers when it's seen a substance before, and then it's able to get benefit from the fiber if it's seen it before. So basically, if you have a low fiber diet, you just take some inulin, and your body's not going to get the health benefit of that inulin. But if you take a little bit every day, it remembers that it knows how to metabolize it, and it gives you the benefits, which in this case are called short chain fatty acids, and they nourish the gut lining and, help inflammation. So that, is an example where just the regularity of eating the fiber would help with over time with the benefits to health.
That's excellent information. What about postbiotics? So there's emerging evidence of a role of postbiotics in perhaps introducing those may be helpful specifically when there is a chronic inflammatory condition. Can you just sort of give us an overview of what postbiotics are, and then where you are, what you've seen in your research and writing with this?
Yeah. So with postbiotics, there's actually kind of a debate in the scientific world about exactly what postbiotics are. So the two sides are that some people are saying that they're the molecules produced by bacteria, that when they metabolize something, they produce a waste product or an end product, and those molecules are called postbiotics. Then the other side kind of says, well, those can just be named by their chemical name. So if it's butyrate, just call it butyrate, don't call it a postbiotic. And they say what postbiotics really are like basically killed bacteria. So they're non-living bacteria that would be like probiotics, but dead. So so there's a bit of a toss up, but I think if you look at the shelves on a health food store, you'll see that most things labeled postbiotic are the first ones, which are like molecules from microbial products, basically. And so these are things, like butyrate or other, just trying to think of examples. There aren't that many on the market. It's kind of an emerging category. And I guess what I would say is there's not a lot of scientific proof on these types of supplements. They have a lot of potential. And in fact, like if you look at the ones that are killed, like an example would be, there's an Epicor product, I think, that's a killed version of Saccharomyces boulardii. And they tested it for immune benefits. So there's a lot of potential, I think, because they don't have to be kept in the supply chain so carefully, right? Because with live microbes or probiotics, you have to be careful not to kill them before they reach the end user. And they have, the refrigeration chain and all that. But if they're already dead, they can be shelf stable. And so I think there's lots of potential there for new kinds of products to reach consumers that are postbiotic. But yeah, I guess I haven't heard a lot of really convincing science that they work. So I think at this point, it'd be better to stick to maybe the pre and probiotics above all.
And can someone have like too many probiotics? Can that be harmful? I know there was some concern in the literature about the probiotics, and our gastrointestinal societies had actually started, they did some multivariate analysis and just looked at all of the evidence, and a lot of areas and spaces, it just wasn't a clear benefit. So, and then we were seeing potentially some bad E. coli strains increasing during this time, and we were concerned about that. And so that universal recommendation to, take some probiotics sort of fell out of favor because of the diversity, in inflammatory bowel disease, we know that the problem with it is that everybody's a little bit different. We have such heterogeneity that we can't just say, okay, take this probiotic and you'll be better, because we're all different and we've got this diversity in our microbiome. And what makes one person better may be harmful to the next person. So can you speak on what you found about the actual use of probiotics, particularly in our inflammatory bowel disease patients, and whether there may be some harm there?
Right. Yeah, the safety is a big concern, I think, to, because you want to recommend treatments that first do no harm, right? And then may have some benefit. I think from what I know of the literature, I mean, first of all, it's really hard to combine studies and come to conclusions in the field of probiotics, because each study kind of uses a different strain or set of strains. And so you can't make conclusions about all of them when you're using different products for each study. So it's pretty tricky. Yeah, so I guess it is very personal. Even if you look at the studies, you'll find groups of subjects in the studies that responded really well and others that didn't respond so well. But on average, maybe there's like an average benefit or something like that. But I should mention, like with Crohn's disease, I think there can be adverse events from probiotics. So really, probiotics are not typically recommended for Crohn's. Maybe for ulcerative colitis, certain strains and groups of strains. But yeah, I think overall, the literature suggests like not for Crohn's.
Hey, Papa.
And what about, have you seen anything about, this comes up a lot in the office, so fecal microbiota transplant, or FMT, that's where we're taking the stool of a healthy donor that is not affected by inflammatory bowel disease, and we are transplanting that good, healthy stool into an inflammatory bowel disease patient. Can you tell us, can you shed some light or add some color to what you've discovered in your scientific writings with this?
Right. Yes. So I think it's quite promising. And I think people were really excited, again, maybe about 5 years ago, about this potential, because some people with ulcerative colitis, especially, who had had a fecal transplant, went into remission and remained in remission. And it was really, really promising. But I think since then, it's like there's a lot of nuance to it. It's kind of hit or miss. So in fact, yeah, I can tell you about this one researcher from Toronto. His name is Paul Moyetti, and he was running one of the early trials, I think in 2015, giving fecal transplants to people with ulcerative colitis. And the trial was going on, and they had found about just less than half of the people had responded to, gotten better with the treatment. And so the ethics committee actually decided to stop the trial. They said, well, I think this is futile, not enough people are getting well. But then they started to look closer, and they found that all the people that got well with this treatment were from one single donor, one fecal donor, donor B. And so they started to think, like, what is it about donor B that, he or she had such good fecal matter that it cured all these people with, or like, sent them into remission. And so I think that's where the research is headed, is like, okay, someone like donor B, this super donor, seems to have the magic formula of what's needed, but they're trying to piece that together. Like, again, it's an ecosystem. So what is it about this ecosystem that's so good that helps people? And then trying to translate that into a more regular type of treatment, and maybe even a drug that's composed of live microbes that you can give and would reliably help people. So like, definitely there's some companies advancing those types of drugs and trying to tweak that and see if that can be like another option therapeutically.
So if my patient comes in and they have done some type of microbiome testing, and it tells them, based on what species they have, what they should eat, and so forth. Is that reliable? Can you tell us about the current assays that are available for microbiome testing, their validity and accuracy, and whether that actually translates into some possible call to action or modification of what we're doing clinically?
Right. Yeah. So if you look online, you'll find various microbiome tests. Some of them use what's called 16S rRNA gene sequencing, and that's sort of a good value. So it's not really expensive, but it gives you information about maybe the species of bacteria and other microorganisms in your gut. Then if you go more high end, there's the shotgun metagenomic sequencing tests. And those give you information often down to the strain. So like the most detailed that you can go. And there's even, I think one company does metatranscriptomics, which tells you like exactly what's happening, what's being produced in the gut, as well as the microbes there. So there's these different levels. So basically it's increasing resolution, right? Like if you think of a pair of binoculars, like you can get a blurry picture, a clearer, and a really clear picture. But the thing is that I gather from the scientific work is that where the tests are a little bit lacking is the validity of taking those results and linking them to a definite health outcome. So they'll give you some recommendations on diet, but it's not necessarily proven that those dietary items or those recommendations are going to improve your health. They might increase certain bacteria, which are likely to improve your health. But again, for you, with your particular ecosystem, it's not guaranteed. So they're based on kind of best guesses. And, if you don't mind spending the money, you're just curious and you want to find out what's in your gut, like fine, but definitely it doesn't replace like a good doctor managing it with, proper medical care. So, I mean, do you often see people coming in with results, Dr. Mccutchen?
Yeah, I've seen a few people with results, and I, do sort of educate them on, I guess, various challenges that I have with the assays that are available. And I think we are definitely learning more. And I think there's a lot of answers that lie within the microbiome. But we do know that, the microbiome in the short term can be affected by medications you're taking. If you choose, to have that burger over the spinach, for example, that will affect the microbiome. And we know that there's multiple specimens that are required to really understand what's happening, and that can change over time. And I do know that, for example, when somebody's having diarrhea, if they're having acute diarrhea, we do know that there are quick shifts that occur in the microbiome. So I worry that they're spending a ton of money on something that we haven't exactly worked the kinks out on. Not that it's totally invalid, because if there's one that, that we come up with and that's been validated, I'd be the first to say, hey, let's see what's in there, because I do think that there is a ton of answers that lie in the microbiome. It's just a consistency of what we're actually measuring and what we actually do with that information. And, people are really, they're hungry for answers. I remember Kim Kardashian, she said she'd eat poop if it helped her stay younger every day. And I know a lot of our IBD patients would do the same if it helped to cure their disease. So I just, I don't want them to sort of get caught up in the snake oil. With that sort of glimpse of hope that there may be an answer there. So that's why I'm asking. And it's great to hear that all the way down to the, what did you call it? The metatranscriptomics, that, that we're getting that fancy and detailed on what we're able to measure.
Yeah, but I agree with you that, there's kind of very little proven benefit to doing that. I mean, once upon a time, I did it on myself and I was just interested. And I found out I have lots of this bacteria called Fecalibacterium prosnitzii. Bit of a mouthful, but it's a kind of famous bacteria in terms of inflammatory bowel disease, because it's an anti-inflammatory bacteria that's found more in people without IBD. So I was happy because I have this family history of digestive issues and IBD. So it made me think, okay, like be a little calmer about things, although I still do try to eat my fiber.
Yeah, so that brings us to like the Mediterranean diet. The reason we like it so much is because it's so high in those fibrous foods that are really going to stimulate our, I hate to say friend or foe, because like you said, the fireflies out where they're supposed to be in an environment that they thrive in is not so bad, but hopefully based on what our particular microbiome consists of, stimulates that particular good bacteria.
Yes.
So
Dr. McCutchen and Christina. Hey guys, good evening. I'm sorry
Hi,
my
Allison.
video is not working, but I'm here. Christina, can I just ask, just kind of very close to what Dr. McCutchen was just mentioning, for people who may, they get this relief, but like Dr. McCutchen said, it works, but then maybe it's not lasting long, not long lasting. How do you feel about, patients who may get recurrent, let's say, urinary tract infections, and so they're constantly being exposed to antibiotics? Would you think that that is a different population for looking at these kind of gut microbe reset, tools versus somebody who, let's say, just wants it to use it for prevention?
Right. Yeah, really good question. I know that when it comes to like antibiotics per se, there are certain types of probiotics and probiotic foods that can help reduce the diarrhea and the disruption that happens from antibiotics. So, and what I don't know is how that interfaces with the inflammatory bowel disease, whether there's something different about antibiotics overlaid on, IBD. But what I recommend checking out is there's something called the Probiotic Guide US, and it's put out by this organization called AE ProBio. That's an educational organization. And if you look in the charts, there are certain probiotics that are good for reducing symptoms after antibiotics. And the key though, that I think, and a myth, people think that you should wait till you're done the antibiotic course and then start the probiotics, because they're like, well, it makes sense that you'd, why take the probiotics with the antibiotics, because you're just killing them all. But in truth, actually better outcomes are seen if you actually take the probiotics as soon as you start the antibiotics. You take them simultaneously. I mean, you don't have to take them in the same mouthful, but like the same day, and keep doing that through the course of the antibiotics. And that leads to the best outcomes. That's kind of the latest science on that. Dr. McCutchen, do you have other things to add to that?
No, completely agree with that there's a clear recommendation that if you're going on antibiotics, that probiotics do have a role there. Probiotics also have a role in a couple of other conditions. If a child is born premature with enterocolitis, and probiotics are also helpful there as well. And that one has, I think, cut across all recommendations from a GI Society standpoint. So great question, Allison. And so I wanted to ask Allison, we have a lot of patients that we see on rounds in the hospital that are really just depressed from their inflammatory bowel disease, or really dealing with a lot of anxiety. And there's been a lot of focus on making sure that we address those mental health issues that arise either as a result of the inflammatory bowel disease, or that they have going on that may kind of flare or exacerbate the inflammatory bowel disease. But as it relates to the microbiome, is there any link between the microbiome and mental health disease?
Definitely. So the area of the gut-brain axis is really up and coming. And I'm involved with a group that is sort of some of the leading scientists there that come together in an academic conference. It's very niche right now, right? This, the field of gut-brain, and particularly how the gut microbes affect this two-way communication that happens between the gut and the brain. So it definitely exists. A lot of this communication happens between or via one highway, which is the vagus nerve. And so the vagus nerve goes from the brain to the digestive organs and is part of this enteral nervous system. And we know that some microbes can stimulate that vagus nerve directly. And so, yeah, like we don't exactly know the interplay between things like depression, anxiety, and inflammatory bowel disease, but there definitely is a connection. And there's these mechanisms, right, happening with the two-way communication that gut problems might cause you to be kind of stuck in a mental rut or even get a diagnosis of anxiety or depression. Or vice versa, sometimes where, if you're having a hard time mentally, then it can affect your gut health and make you have more symptoms. So, and that's more with IBS, I guess, irritable bowel syndrome, more than IBD, but I think definitely there's a two-way connection. There are even probiotics that claim to help your mental health. A few of them are on the market. Again, not many studies have been done on them, but if someone was to look them up and try them, it might not be harmful.
Fantastic. Allison, do you have anything to add there? Not sure what happened to Mo. So another question that came up was about there's a posterior auricular stimulation device that is supposed to increase your microbiome diversity. And so I was curious as to where we were with that. I do think that digital devices are just fascinating, and we'll continue to see increasing numbers of those on the market, but what's the science behind it?
Yeah, I guess for me, I've never tried it, and I have only kind of seen the studies in passing. And there may be some benefit, again, through the gut-brain axis. It's very plausible that this could be having an effect on your gut through that vagus nerve and the way that it influences your gut environment. So yeah, it may have benefit, but I am not sure that it's like a guaranteed benefit yet, or they know exactly kind of the parameters of this therapy yet. But yeah, I don't know. Have you seen people get benefit from it in your practice?
No, I literally just saw this. So I just came across it, and when I was kind of browsing through some of the latest innovations in AI. And so it was actually in that AI arena that they were coming up with these additional therapeutics. So I'm not sure. I didn't know if anyone had really studied this. I know it's not mainstream yet, and we're still, of course, trying to even understand gut diversity as it is. But so I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, and there might be more innovations like that, like you say. Definitely innovations in the drug area where there's different kinds of drugs like these live biotherapeutic products that will be kind of a new type of drug to address inflammatory bowel disease. But also, yeah, like innovations in AI, or I've also heard of different like things being developed to really tailor your diet and sort of, yeah, using machine learning and having like a lot of people over time in your database, then you can predict which foods are going to be tolerable.
That's right. So what about, see, there was another question. Oh, the effects of biologics on the gut microbiome. So, we basically know that with the immune system and inflammatory bowel disease, it's sort of immune dysregulation. And what I said at a recent conference was that it's sort of like we have this innate immune system, which is kind of like we're born with this. This is like the person that's always ready to fight. And then we have our one that's kind of our adaptive immune system. That's our trained immune system. That's the one that, you know, learns over time and knows what to respond to and what not to respond to. And in inflammatory bowel disease, there appears to be a regulation, a dysregulation of both. Can you kind of speak to that and whether, and the role of some of the medications that we actually give for inflammatory bowel disease in controlling that, or the interplay between the medications and the microbiome? Sorry.
Yeah, so this is like, yeah, super up and coming area for the pharma companies, because I think some of the studies, they just basically tested just an array of different drugs for all kinds of, you know, conditions, and found that most of them, like 85% of them or something, affect the gut microbes. And so they're not neutral to the gut microbes. And so it could be the case that some of these drugs, like the way they work is through the gut microbes, through what they do to the gut microbes. And already the research in a couple of areas is showing this, like, you know, my mother-in-law has Parkinson's disease, takes levodopa, and they have found that like the efficacy of levodopa is actually because of the gut microbes in part. They never knew that. They just knew it kind of worked, but they, you know, now the research is showing, oh, actually that's part of why it works. And can we now go back and say, well, what were the gut microbes at baseline before they took the drug of the ones that it worked for? Can we replicate that for everyone and make the drug really more effective for everyone? So I see that happening a little bit in inflammatory bowel disease as well, trying to see, like, before someone took the first dose of any, you know, medication, what were their gut microbes, and then how did they respond? And then if they're a responder, great. But if they're a non-responder, could we tweak that baseline microbiome to make them more you know, receptive to responding to the drug? So I think there's this huge area that's coming up where it's going to be, there'll be a lot more efficacy of the drugs. Because, you know, so many times, right, someone goes on one drug and it's not a good fit. They try another. So it would be really nice to be able to say at the outset, okay, we'll give you this microbiome tweaking substance, whatever it is, and then you're definitely going to be a responder. So yeah, that's definitely an up and coming area. And also, I wanted to get back a little bit to what you were saying before about the Mediterranean diet. So moving away from drugs to diet, just that I think that's super key, the Mediterranean diet. The co-author of the textbook I wrote, Natasha Haskey, she's a registered dietitian who has worked with people with IBD and then went back to school to get her doctorate, and basically ran some studies on people with inflammatory bowel disease and the Mediterranean diet, and found like there's multiple ways that diet helps with the symptoms and overall outcomes through, you know, the microbes.
That is just fascinating. So, I mean, you hit on several key points, but one of the most exciting areas of research right now is understanding the microbiome of IBD patients and being able to predict a drug response based on their particular microbiome content. So I think that this is definitely an emerging area, and I'm excited to see, once we actually can validate some of these home testing kits and everything, you know, where we'll be able to go, and whether we'll be able to actually change from a lifestyle standpoint what people are doing and being able to positively impact their disease outcomes. So I'm going to turn it over to Allison now to see if she has any additional questions. We've got about 5 minutes, and then I really want to open it up to the audience to see if we have any questions for Kristina. The microbiome, you've all taken probiotics and prebiotics. You brought them to me to the office, these gut health supplements. So I want some more questions to be fired at us.
Christina, thank you so much for all of your information. I think, like Dr. McCutchen just said, we really covered a big, broad spectrum of information. I think that we always, at least I always hear from patients. I'm part of some of these other Facebook, IBD groups where patients will say, I already know the foods that I should eat that trigger my symptoms, or I've been taking this over-the-counter supplement and it really helps my my symptoms. And Dr. McCutchen and I, whenever we're in these support groups, we always really try to make sure that we're all on the same page, that we want to make sure that patients with IBD, even though we're talking about, the gut microbiome, et cetera, that if patients want to use this as an alternative to help with symptoms, that we want to make sure that we're still making sure that people know that medical management and treatment should not be replaced by some of the things that we've talked about today. How do you feel about some of the medications and patients potentially, trying to transition off of certain medications because there's so much of a focus of gut microbiome and IBD?
I mean,
Because
yeah,
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. There are so many patients now, we talk about risks and benefits and we've got great drugs, but there are still always those people who would really rather try to be on something that is not a medicine. Obviously, that's not Dr. McCutchen and I's approach, but we still like to at least kind of talk about how we could entertain those questions.
yeah. I mean, to me, it all just comes down to the data, and what data are out there that show that any of this is effective. And by far, the data really supports drug therapy as the way to treat inflammatory bowel disease. There are kind of these different people that sometimes rise to prominence on social media or something that claim, oh, I went off all my drugs and I manage it by diet. But I'm not sure. I don't think that's for everyone. Obviously, it's not safe for everyone, and your disease will get worse in most cases. So it's very rare. And again, we don't really know why, if it's possible to do that, how, and I think the only way to find out is to do more studies on these other interventions. And maybe, I think the gut microbes really allow scientists to get more precise about what to study and say what probiotic strains and what is the baseline of the gut microbes and the diet beforehand. And does that make a difference? And we'll get to more precise therapies that are less, those drugs, but I think we're not there yet. And I definitely agree, Allison, that, people should make sure, it's the medical management first and foremost. And then, whatever you can't manage that way, maybe you look at other things that with the support of your doctor.
Thanks so much, Christina.
Yeah, that's a great point raised. When we're on these support groups, we always emphasize the fact that a lot of when we have speakers on, it's more adjunctive therapies too that we're talking about. And, it's not that a probiotic can cure the disease, for example, or one microbiome supplement can be curative of the disease. If it was that simple, then we would just go around and sprinkle this on everybody and they'd be cured. So it's not, this is a very complex disease. It varies from person to person, and it's the interplay of the immune system, environment, genetics, and that whole interplay. And so it's way more complex than we think. And even from one person to the next, we're outnumbered by our bacteria. I think is it 150x of 150 times the amount of genetic material from bacteria as opposed to our own human DNA. So we have got to learn first what's going on in there before we jump to some conclusions about what to do with it. But I do think it's very promising, Christina, and I truly appreciate your time tonight. We've learned a lot tonight. I've learned a lot tonight. And I want to thank all of the participants that were on. There was one question that popped up, and I'll close with it. And that was, does Pepto-Bismol kill the probiotic in the GI tract?
That's a very good question. I don't know the answer to that. Yeah, it would be nice to have studies that combine probiotics with different, typical substances that people use. But Yeah, I would say, yeah, if you take a probiotic and it's effective and you also take Pepto-Bismol, then go ahead and take them together. I mean, yeah, just from the studies, there's no reason why why it would kill the bacteria.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time. Ashley, do you have any questions before we close out tonight? It is now 8:01.
No, I think that was wonderful. Thank you so much, Chris.
Thank you for having me. Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
Christina.
Twitter handle, Christina, for anybody that wants to follow you.
Oh, yes. So it's at by Chris Campbell. That's BYKRIS and Campbell. So yeah, I'm active on Twitter. I love to share the newest studies. So maybe see you over there.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight and have a great evening.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you so
Good
much.
night.
Thank you.